Hi, my name is Stephanie Colbank. I'm a graduate student at Morningside University, and I am currently a special education teacher for preschool and kindergarten in the Albia Community School District here in Iowa. I did a study on, it was a case study observing the increase in student achievement when given hands-on materials in place of worksheets in the preschool special education setting. I decided to do this after teaching a year at in this district where I realized that there are many worksheets used every day in a 3-hour time frame for preschoolers, and just don't necessarily agree that that is developmentally appropriate for our preschoolers. My statement of the problem are that worksheets are not developmentally appropriate for preschool age students. Worksheets have right or wrong answers and do not allow for differentiation, problem solving, or extended learning. There is some research on general education classroom settings and the effects of worksheets, but there is a definite lack of it with regards to special education. The impact of the problem. There's a lack of student engagement when they use worksheets. They tend to be handed out. They can't work together. They do their own work on the worksheet, and there's not necessarily a lot of engagement with their peers. No differentiation. Most worksheets are just kind of a see what you get kind of thing. That's what they have to do. It's hard to make them more appropriate for a student who's struggling and more advanced for a student that might need a little more of a challenge. There's also a decrease in problem solving when it's just a worksheet given to you and the problem is right there. It's very hard to look at other ways to solve it, especially at the preschool level. Worksheets have right or wrong answers only. Many students struggle if they're not able to do it. They just feel like they don't know when they might know if they look at it in a different way. And they do not typically encourage creativity. Many teachers want the worksheet done the way that they've instructed it and no other way. There tends to be less confidence in students, in relation to the right or wrong answers. A student may think, well, I don't know it. And when they might know the answer, they just don't understand it in that format. And then there's some students who don't feel challenged, therefore may have a lack of confidence because they're not, they're like, oh, I know all the answers to these every time, and aren't necessarily promoting higher learning. So, and then less engagement with teachers. Many worksheets are passed out. A teacher may give directions on how the worksheet should be completed, but they aren't necessarily sitting down there with them in groups discussing the worksheets, and students are not necessarily interacting with their peers when they're doing worksheets either. There were a couple of interventions in the past that I researched. Both were mathematics studies. One was from Bidabadi et al., and they looked at hands-on instruction and manipulatives and how it compared to a textbook, a curriculum that had a lot of worksheets. And they found that students that were using manipulatives were more engaged, and they learned more in the end than those who were just given worksheets or maybe pages from a textbook. And the same group also had increased collaboration with others, so they were engaged with their peers and asking questions and maybe observing what another student was doing and trying it themselves, where worksheets do not necessarily allow for that kind of work. Another intervention was related to math with Krishnan, and it involved 45 kindergartners. There were multiple assessments given to these students, and once again, this study also determined that there was a lack, due to worksheets, a lack of mathematical knowledge, math concepts, things like that, and found that if they use more manipulatives or concrete objects so they can see the math and feel it and see how it's working, it tends to stick a little better in their minds, and it helps them with problem solving. They were also engaged in more conversation with peers, in collaboration with others, and with the teachers. The purpose of the study is to demonstrate how hands-on activities in the preschool education setting will increase achievement levels within the students. The goal is to achieve more developmentally appropriate curriculum in preschool programs for both general education settings and the special education settings. Hopefully, just more developmentally appropriate practice and less worksheets and seat work. This study was a qualitative case research study. We involved 4 special education students that I currently work with, 2 boys, 2 girls, and all at the age of 4. We went into a one-on-one setting, something that we already normally do every day for the specially designed instruction related to their IEP, and this was done in addition to that time. So for 6 weeks, 5 days a week, we went in a pattern, 1 week of literacy, 1 week of math, and alternated weeks. The first 3 weeks, the students worked with worksheets only, and this could include maybe a pencil, crayons, glue, and scissors if needed, but nothing other than that. And then the next 3 weeks, they used hands-on materials only, so there were absolutely no worksheets used during this instruction, and they could use rocks, sticks, many different hands-on manipulatives, felt numbers and letters, and able to kind of do it in their own way. It wasn't necessarily, it was an open-ended type thing, activity. And Teaching Strategies Gold was the assessment tool used. It has a leveling system that is used throughout, it's universally used throughout the preschool, 4-year-old preschools in Iowa, and tells the teacher whether the student is kind of performing at a developmentally appropriate level, if they're a little behind or ahead, and this was assessed every day with each student after every lesson. The results, 1 out of 4 students had an increase in achievement with hands-on materials. This bar graph demonstrates some different ways that, or different data, different patterns that were revealed throughout this study. 4 out of 4 students had an increase in interest with hands-on materials. I think it's important to note that there was no increase in achievement noted with worksheets, and there was actually 2 out of 4 students that had a decrease when using worksheets. Again, can be possibly related to the fact that they are exposed to many worksheets in the general education setting every day in this program, where they spend most of their time. There were also 5 absolute refusals with worksheets throughout this 6-week period, where the student just simply refused to do it. There were 0 refusals when introduced to a hands-on activity. There are a couple theories that help support this type of research. Vygotsky's theory very much promotes using stimulating activities, appropriate, developmentally appropriate activities for students depending on their own level, and believes that these activities should be adapted to the child's level. Constructivist teaching strategy was another one that seemed to support this research. They recognize that each child learns differently, that students should be encouraged to use multiple avenues of learning, such as manipulatives or hands-on materials. And again, some more support from research. Apgan et al. Encourages manipulative-based curriculum instead of textbook-based and teacher-led instruction. They explain that this type of teaching leads to a decrease in engagement in student learning. Ransom et al. Explain that worksheets and seat work do not engage or motivate students, which was supported by this research. As I mentioned, there were a couple patterns that were revealed after looking at the data. Student achievement was the main focus originally, but there was also definitely a theme involving student interest and engagement after looking at the data. and all the observational notes that were taken. And again, 1 out of 4 students had an increase in achievement with hands-on materials. There are implications for parents. They need to be educated about appropriate curriculums in preschools. This applies to both general education and special education. Parents are the best advocates for their child's education, and it's important for them to know what is their child being taught at school. Not necessarily to be there and hover over everything all the time, but to just hopefully realize and know the importance of appropriate instruction, and just ask their children questions, ask teachers questions, and make sure that there's a good open line of communication between the parents and teachers so that they're educated. Implications for teachers. It's important for them to realize, for all of us teachers to realize that things may change. We may discover that something is more appropriate for instruction, and to have an open mind and a willingness to learn a new method or strategy than what we originally were taught or thought was best. Moving from worksheets to hands-on materials might be difficult, but it's important for districts to implement it and maybe support it by having a professional development day where teachers can learn more strategies and see the evidence behind why this is best practice for students. And of course, it will need to be implemented with fidelity. And implications for students. They will receive a more appropriate education in the preschool, which will promote higher learning, higher order thinking, a growth mindset for them in present day and in the future. And there's also an increase in collaboration between students. Peers can work with each other, and this is also a special and important skill for them to develop socially, and the younger the better. There were, of course, some limitations and recommendations related to this research. I think a longer case study in the future could reveal more patterns. This was a 6-week study, which was relatively short. It was also a small sample. 4 students were a part of it, so maybe a larger sample size would reveal more themes and just stronger data. There was also bias due to researchers' feelings regarding worksheets. The researcher obviously did not agree with all the worksheets being used, so that could have created some bias in this research. A more consistent curriculum area might be beneficial instead of alternating between math lessons and literacy lessons, maybe focusing on just math for 6 weeks or just literacy. It could also help give us some stronger data. And then to take into account student absences. 2 of the 4 students were gone at least 3 days over the 6-week period, and we know that absences play a hand in affecting students' achievement and affecting their knowledge, and just basically affects their overall demeanor at school. So that was important to recognize as well. In conclusion, again, while the study I mentioned it had limitations and that some future research would be beneficial and is recommended, it's very important that this remains a vital research study for students. We owe it to our children to give them the best education and appropriate education and help them become lifelong learners. Thank you for listening. I also have 2 slides with my references. Thank you.